Welcome to Decision Making Frameworks. Every day you make hundreds of decisions. Some are trivial, like what to have for lunch. Some are consequential, like whether to take a new job, launch a product, or end a relationship. The quality of your life is largely determined by the quality of your decisions. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Your brain is not naturally good at making decisions. We're riddled with cognitive biases. We're swayed by emotions. We overweight recent information and underweight base rates. We confuse confidence with accuracy. We're systematically irrational in predictable ways. The good news is that we can compensate for these weaknesses. Centuries of philosophy, decades of psychology and behavioral economics have given us mental models and frameworks that help us think more clearly. These aren't just academic concepts. They're practical tools that, once learned, become second nature. Today, I'm going to teach you the most useful decision-making frameworks I know. By the end of this episode, you'll have a toolkit for thinking better about the decisions that matter. You'll be able to categorize decisions quickly, avoid common traps, think through consequences more thoroughly, and know when to decide fast versus when to deliberate carefully. Let's start with why you need these frameworks in the first place, with an honest look at how your brain fails. Before we get to the frameworks, you need to understand why you need them. Your brain, as remarkable as it is, has systematic flaws in how it processes information and makes decisions. Let me introduce you to some of the cognitive biases that affect every decision you make. Confirmation bias is the tendency to seek, interpret, and remember information that confirms what you already believe. If you think a project will succeed, you'll notice the evidence of progress and discount the warning signs. You're not deliberately ignoring contrary evidence. Your brain is filtering it out automatically. Anchoring means that the first piece of information you encounter disproportionately influences your judgment. If I tell you a product costs $500 and then offer it to you for $300, you think it's a good deal. But if I had started at $200 and raised it to $300, you'd think it was expensive. Same price, completely different perception, based solely on the anchor. The availability heuristic causes us to overweight information that's vivid or recent. Plane crashes feel more dangerous than car accidents because they're more memorable, even though statistically the opposite is true. You overestimate risks you can easily imagine and underestimate risks you can't. These biases aren't bugs in a few people's thinking. They're features of how all human brains work. Knowing about them doesn't make you immune, but it does allow you to build processes that compensate. Beyond cognitive biases, emotions systematically distort our thinking. Loss aversion means that the pain of losing something is psychologically about twice as powerful as the pleasure of gaining something equivalent. This causes us to make irrational choices to avoid losses, even when taking the loss would be the right decision. When you're frustrated, you make impulsive decisions just to end the discomfort. How many times have you agreed to something or quit something in a moment of frustration, only to regret it later? When you're excited, you become overconfident. You underestimate risks and obstacles. You're susceptible to optimism bias, believing that things will go better than base rates would predict. The insidious thing is that we don't feel emotional when we're making these distorted decisions. We feel logical. We construct rational-sounding justifications for what are actually emotionally driven choices. This is why frameworks matter. A good framework forces you through a process that creates distance from your immediate emotional state and activates more deliberate, systematic thinking. There's another hidden force degrading your decisions: decision fatigue. Every decision you make, no matter how small, consumes cognitive resources. These resources are limited and deplete throughout the day. As they deplete, your decision quality declines. Research shows this clearly. Judges making parole decisions are significantly more likely to grant parole right after lunch than right before lunch. The decisions themselves haven't changed. The prisoners haven't changed. The judge's cognitive resources have simply been depleted, and the default safe choice when you're depleted is to say no. This has profound implications. Important decisions should be made when you're fresh, typically in the morning. Routine decisions should be systematized or eliminated so they don't drain your finite willpower. This is why successful people often wear the same outfit or eat the same breakfast every day. They're not lazy about fashion or food. They're strategically preserving decision energy for choices that matter. Protect your decision-making capacity. Schedule important decisions for your peak hours. Reduce trivial decisions through routines and defaults. If you must make an important decision when depleted, at least know that your judgment is compromised and compensate with extra deliberation or by delaying. Sleep's impact on decision-making cannot be overstated. When you're sleep deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for judgment and impulse control, is significantly impaired. Studies show that 24 hours without sleep produces cognitive impairment equivalent to a blood alcohol level of 0.1%. That's legally drunk. You wouldn't make major decisions while intoxicated, yet people routinely make critical choices while severely sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation specifically damages your ability to assess risk, consider long-term consequences, and regulate emotional reactions. All the things you need most for good decisions. You become more impulsive, more emotional, and less able to think through consequences. There's a simple rule: never make an important, irreversible decision when you're exhausted. If you find yourself contemplating a major choice after a sleepless night, consciously delay. Tell yourself, I will decide this after I've slept. The decision will still be there tomorrow, and you'll evaluate it with a functional brain. This isn't weakness. This is recognizing that you're working with compromised hardware. A good decision maker knows when they're not equipped to make good decisions. Here's a particularly troubling finding from decision science. Most people believe they're above average decision makers. In studies, roughly 80% of people rate themselves in the top 50% for decision-making ability. This is, of course, mathematically impossible. This overconfidence shows up in specific predictions too. When people say they're 90% confident in a prediction, they're right only about 70% of the time. We're systematically too sure of ourselves. Worse, confidence and accuracy are poorly correlated. The people who are most confident are not necessarily the most accurate, and the feeling of certainty, that sense of just knowing something is right, is a terrible indicator of whether you're actually right. This has a practical implication. The more certain you feel about a decision, the more you should deliberately check your thinking. Certainty should trigger skepticism, not comfort. When something feels obvious, that's often when your biases are operating most strongly. The frameworks we'll learn are designed to counteract this overconfidence by forcing you to consider perspectives and possibilities that field-based decision-making misses. Let's start with a framework from Jeff Bezos that's deceptively simple but incredibly powerful, distinguishing between reversible and irreversible decisions. Bezos describes two types of decisions using the metaphor of doors. One-way doors are decisions that are hard or impossible to reverse. If you walk through, you can't easily walk back. Selling your company, having a child, committing to a massive strategic direction, signing a long-term contract, these deserve careful deliberation. Two-way doors are decisions you can reverse if they don't work out. Launch a feature and it flops, roll it back. Try a new process and it doesn't work, stop using it. Hire someone on a trial period and it's not working. Part ways amicably. Here's the crucial insight. Most decisions are two-way doors, even though they don't feel like it in the moment. Our anxiety makes reversible decisions feel permanent. We agonize over choices that could easily be undone. The problem is that people treat too many decisions as irreversible. They deliberate endlessly over two-way door decisions, burning time and missing opportunities. Meanwhile, tired from all that deliberation, they sometimes rush through actual one-way doors. Your first job is to correctly categorize the decision. Challenge yourself. If this doesn't work, can it be undone or adjusted? If yes, it's a two-way door. Once you've categorized the decision, match your process to the type. For one-way door decisions, slow down, get more information, consult people with different perspectives. Sleep on it. The cost of a bad decision is high and essentially permanent, so extra time is almost always worth it. For two-way door decisions, move fast. Make the call with reasonable information, not perfect information. You'll learn far more from doing than from analyzing, and if you're wrong, you can adjust. Here's why this matters strategically. Speed is a genuine competitive advantage. Organizations and individuals who decide quickly and learn from outcomes outperform those who deliberate endlessly. They get more at-bats, more feedback, more learning cycles. But speed is only an advantage when the decisions are reversible. Fast decisions on irreversible choices can be catastrophic. A company that moves fast on product features but deliberates carefully on acquisitions is using the framework correctly. Most people default to the same decision speed for everything. The framework lets you consciously vary your approach based on what the decision actually requires. Let's look at how this framework applies to common decisions. Hiring seems irreversible, but usually isn't. If you structure roles with clear probation periods and give candid feedback early, parting ways with a bad fit is uncomfortable but manageable. This means you can hire faster without excessive deliberation. Get people in, evaluate based on actual performance, adjust if needed. Marriage is harder to reverse. The legal, financial, emotional, and social entanglement makes unwinding a marriage costly. This deserves careful deliberation. Living together first, long engagements, honest conversations about compatibility. These aren't signs of commitment issues. They're appropriate caution for a one-way door. Product launches are almost always reversible, especially in software. You can pull features, roll back changes, issue updates. Yet teams often agonize over launches as if they were permanent. Ship faster. Learn from real users. Reputation damage is often truly irreversible. Once trust is broken, it's extraordinarily hard to rebuild. A single public scandal, ethical lapse, or betrayal can permanently alter how people see you. This is why ethical considerations deserve extreme caution, even when other factors might push you to move fast. Map each decision to its true reversibility. Often you'll find you've been treating reversible decisions as permanent and not being careful enough with truly irreversible ones. For reversible decisions, there's a hidden cost to excessive deliberation, opportunity cost. While you're analyzing, researching, and deliberating, time is passing. Competitors are moving. Market conditions are changing. Your team is sitting idle, waiting for direction. The opportunity you're evaluating may disappear. There's also a psychological cost. Extended deliberation creates anxiety. It keeps the decision hanging over you. The mental bandwidth consumed by an open decision isn't available for other thinking. Here's a counterintuitive truth. For reversible decisions, a fast wrong decision often beats a slow right one. Why? Because a fast decision gets you real-world feedback. You learn what you couldn't have learned from analysis alone, and you can adjust. If you spend 3 months choosing the perfect software tool, and I spend 1 week choosing a good enough tool and 2 months using it, I know things you don't. I know how it actually works in practice, what the real problems are, whether it integrates with our workflows. That knowledge is worth more than your analysis. The lesson? For reversible decisions, set a deadline. Make the call with reasonable information, bias toward action. You'll learn faster and can always adjust. Now let's look at a framework specifically designed for emotional decisions, the kind where your feelings are intense and possibly misleading you. The 10-10-10 rule developed by Susie Welch is beautifully simple. When facing a decision, ask yourself, how will I feel about this decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years? 10 minutes captures your immediate emotional reaction, the impulse, the fear, the excitement, the discomfort. 10 months captures the medium term, past the initial emotion, living with the consequences, seeing how things played out. 10 years captures the long term, looking back on this decision from a distance. Will you even remember it? Will it matter? This framework is powerful because our emotions are heavily weighted toward the immediate. The fear or excitement you feel right now looms large and dominates your thinking, but the 10-month and 10-year perspectives reveal what actually matters over time. Often, something that feels terrifying in 10 minutes feels neutral in 10 months and completely irrelevant in 10 years. That's a signal to push through the short-term fear. Conversely, something that feels good in 10 minutes but looks bad in 10 months is a warning sign to override your impulse. When should you use 10-10-10? It's most valuable for emotionally charged decisions where your immediate feelings might be leading you astray. Should I quit my job in frustration after a terrible week? 10 minutes? Relieved? Vindicated? 10 months? Possibly regretting a hasty choice made in anger? 10 years? Probably doesn't matter either way, assuming you found another good job. This analysis suggests don't make the decision while emotional. Wait until the immediate feelings fade. Should I have a difficult conversation I've been avoiding? 10 minutes. Uncomfortable, maybe awkward, possibly conflict. 10 months, probably resolved. Relationship likely better for addressing the issue directly. 10 years, you won't remember the discomfort. You will remember if it was never addressed. This analysis suggests have the conversation despite the short-term discomfort. The 10-year perspective is particularly useful for revealing how many decisions simply don't matter in the long run. If it won't matter in 10 years, maybe you shouldn't agonize over it now. Save your deliberation energy for decisions with lasting impact. Let me share some specific examples of how 10-10-10 clarifies real decisions. Career decisions often look different across time frames. A scary job change or relocation might feel terrifying in 10 minutes. But in 10 months, you're settled and growing. In 10 years, you can barely remember why you were so afraid. This suggests take the scary opportunity. Short-term discomfort almost always fades. Conflict avoidance inverts this pattern. Not addressing a problem with a colleague might feel comfortable in 10 minutes. You avoided the awkward conversation. But in 10 months, the issue has festered and damaged the relationship. In 10 years, maybe the relationship is completely broken. This suggests have the hard conversation now despite the short-term discomfort. Major purchases often trigger intense emotional reactions that fade. That car or gadget you desperately want feels essential in 10 minutes. In 10 months, it's just another thing you own. In 10 years, you probably don't even remember why it seemed so important. This perspective helps reduce impulse buying. Relationship decisions benefit enormously from the long view. The annoyances that feel intolerable in 10 minutes often become endearing quirks by 10 years. Conversely, fundamental incompatibilities that seem manageable now may become unbearable over decades. 10-10-10 helps you distinguish between temporary friction and structural problems. 10-10-10 is a powerful emotional regulation tool, but complex decisions often require more than emotional clarity. They require data. For important decisions, combine multiple approaches. Use data to understand base rates and probabilities. What typically happens in situations like this? What's the evidence about likely outcomes? This grounds your thinking in reality rather than imagination. Then use 10-10-10 to check your emotional response. Is your gut feeling consistent with what the data suggests? If the data says something is likely to work out well but you feel terrified, that's useful information. Maybe you're being irrationally afraid, or maybe you're sensing something the data doesn't capture. If the data says something is risky but you feel irrationally optimistic, that's also a signal. Your excitement might be blinding you to real dangers the evidence reveals. The best decisions come from integrating analytical thinking and emotional intelligence. Data without emotional clarity can miss human factors. Emotion without data can be wildly miscalibrated. 10-10-10 plus base rate analysis gives you both the statistical view and the human experience view. Use them together. Next is one of my favorite mental models, inversion. Instead of asking how to succeed, ask how you would fail, then avoid those things. Inversion flips the normal approach to problem solving. Usually we ask, how do I achieve this goal? What should I do? This is positive thinking. It works to a point. Inversion asks the opposite question. How would I guarantee failure? What should I definitely not do? This is negative thinking, but it's often more actionable. Here's why it works. Predicting exactly how to succeed is hard. There are many paths to success, and which will work depends on circumstances you can't fully control. But predicting how to fail is much easier. There are usually clear ways to guarantee a bad outcome. Ignore your customers, run out of money, hire the wrong people, move too slowly, move too fast without testing, ignore warning signs. These failure modes are more predictable and avoidable than success factors are achievable. So when facing a decision or planning a project, list all the ways you could fail, then work backward. Design your approach to actively avoid these failure modes. This doesn't guarantee success, but it removes the most common obstacles to it. The premortem is a specific application of inversion. It was developed by psychologist Gary Klein and is one of the highest leverage team exercises you can do. Here's how it works. Before a project starts, gather the team and say, imagine it's 12 months from now. The project has failed spectacularly, not just underperformed, but failed completely. Let's go around the room. Why did it fail? This framing unlocks insights that normal planning sessions miss. People feel free to voice concerns that would seem negative in a typical meeting. The timeline is too aggressive. We don't have the right skills. The executive sponsor might lose interest. Legal is going to slow us down. All of these become easier to say when framed as reasons for a hypothetical failure rather than objections to the current plan. Once you have the list of failure modes, work backward. For each one, ask, how do we prevent this? Adjust the plan, add contingencies, or at least consciously accept the risk. The premortem takes about an hour and can save months of pain. Use it before any significant initiative. When you practice inversion, certain failure patterns appear repeatedly across different contexts. Learning these patterns helps you spot them faster. Running out of resources is perhaps the most common failure mode. Projects die because time runs out, money runs out, or people burn out before the finish line. Ask yourself, do we have enough runway? What happens if this takes twice as long as expected? If resource depletion is a risk, plan for it explicitly. Misaligned stakeholders doom projects constantly. Everyone thinks they agree on the goal, but they're actually optimizing for different things. The engineering team wants technical elegance. The sales team wants features to close deals. The finance team wants cost control. These tensions, if unaddressed, create friction that kills initiatives. During your pre-mortem, ask, are all key stakeholders actually aligned, or are we assuming alignment that doesn't exist? Dependencies on unreliable factors create fragility. If your plan requires that a particular partner, vendor, or regulatory body behaves in a specific way, and you have no control over that, you have risk. What if they don't do what you expect? Ignoring early warning signs is how small problems become catastrophic failures. The warning signs are almost always there before a disaster. People just didn't want to see them or felt unable to act on them. Build explicit checkpoints to assess whether you're seeing warnings you're ignoring. Inversion works beautifully for personal decisions, not just professional ones. How would I guarantee this relationship fails? Stop communicating honestly. Take my partner for granted. Prioritize work over quality time consistently. Stop showing appreciation. Let resentments fester. Stop growing as a person. Now I know exactly what to avoid. How would I ensure my health deteriorates? Stop exercising. Eat processed food. Stay up late staring at screens. Never manage stress. Avoid doctors. Ignore warning symptoms. The avoidance list becomes my health maintenance checklist. How would I sabotage my career? Stop learning. Coast on past achievements. Avoid difficult projects. Burn bridges with colleagues. Become known as unreliable. Never help others. The anti-pattern shows me what to consistently do the opposite of. This approach works because it's psychologically easier to identify what's obviously bad than to define what's optimally good. Nobody really knows the perfect relationship strategy, but everyone can agree that stopping communication and taking your partner for granted is bad. Inversion gives you a clear floor. Here's what I definitely won't do. That floor is often more actionable than an aspirational ceiling of what you might do perfectly. Now let's talk about thinking further ahead. Most people stop at the immediate consequences of a decision. Second-order thinking goes further, and that's where competitive advantage lives. First-order thinking asks, if I do this, what happens? It's direct, immediate, obvious. Everyone does first-order thinking. Second-order thinking asks, and then what happens next? It traces the consequences one step further. Third-order thinking continues the chain, and then what? Tracing consequences even further into the future. Here's a concrete example. First order, if we lower prices, we'll get more customers. This seems like an obvious win. More customers means more revenue, right? Second order, if we get more customers from low prices, we'll also attract price-sensitive customers who might churn when a competitor matches our price. This complicates the picture. Third order, if we attract price-sensitive customers and competitors match our pricing, we'll end up in a price war with a customer base that only cares about price. This reveals the potential danger that first-order thinking completely missed. Most people stop at first order because it's easier and faster. Competitive advantage in decision-making comes from thinking further ahead, seeing consequences that others miss. Practice building consequence chains explicitly. It's a skill that improves with use. Take a decision you're considering. Write down the first-order consequence, then ask and then what, and write down the second-order consequence. Keep going. Example, action. We hire aggressively to speed up delivery. First order, we get more work done faster. Second order, new people need training, which actually slows down existing people in the short term. Third order, culture may dilute as new people outnumber veterans who carry institutional knowledge. Fourth order, miscommunication increases as tacit knowledge isn't transferred and teams become larger. Keep asking and then what until you run out of consequences or they become too speculative to be useful. Usually 3 or 4 levels is enough to reveal hidden costs or benefits that would otherwise be invisible. This exercise takes 5 minutes and can completely change how you evaluate a decision. Make it a habit before any significant choice. Second-order thinking requires understanding incentives. People, including you, respond to incentives far more than to stated intentions or moral appeals. When evaluating a decision, ask, what behavior does this create incentives for? Not what behavior do I want? Not what behavior should people exhibit? What behavior does the structure of incentives encourage? If you pay salespeople purely on commission, you incentivize aggressive sales tactics and potentially misleading customers. That's not because salespeople are bad. It's because the incentive structure pushes that direction, and humans respond to incentives. If you reward employees for looking busy, you get people who look busy. If you reward outcomes, you get focus on outcomes. If you punish failure, you get risk aversion. These aren't moral judgments. They're predictable responses to incentive structures. Many unintended consequences come from incentive misalignment. The policy sounds good, the goals are admirable, but the incentive structure encourages something different from the stated intention, and behavior follows incentives. When evaluating your own decisions, think like an economist. Assume people, including yourself, will respond to incentives. Design accordingly. Don't rely on good intentions or moral suasion to counteract bad incentives. Fix the incentives. History is full of examples where well-intentioned decisions had exactly the opposite of their intended effect. The classic example is the cobra effect. Colonial administrators in India, wanting to reduce the cobra population, offered a bounty for dead cobras. This seemed logical. Fewer cobras means fewer snake bites, but people started breeding cobras to collect the bounty. When the government caught on and canceled the program, breeders released their now worthless cobras, and the cobra population actually increased. This pattern repeats constantly. Metrics that are meant to measure quality become targets that are gamed. Regulations designed to protect often create barriers that hurt the people they're meant to help. Subsidies intended to reduce prices sometimes increase them. Tax incentives meant to encourage certain behavior often just reward people who were going to do it anyway. The lesson for your decision-making: always ask how a decision could be gamed or exploited. Assume smart, self-interested people will find ways to optimize for their benefit within whatever rules you create. This isn't cynicism, it's realism about how incentives work. Good decisions account for likely gaming and unintended consequences. They don't assume everyone will cooperate with the spirit of the policy. They design for how people will actually behave, not how they should behave. This framework addresses how much effort to put into a decision. Sometimes less analysis is actually better. Knowing when to stop searching is a critical skill. Psychologist Barry Schwartz identified 2 fundamentally different approaches to decisions. Maximizers try to find the best possible option. They research extensively, compare every alternative, and keep searching until they're confident they've found the optimum. Satisficers take a different approach. They define good enough criteria up front and stop searching when they find an option that meets those criteria. They accept that there might be something better out there, but they don't exhaust themselves looking for it. Here's the counterintuitive finding from the research. Satisficers are often happier with their decisions than maximizers, despite putting in less effort. Why? Because maximizers can never be completely sure they found the best. There's always the possibility of something better they didn't discover. This leads to decision paralysis before the choice and regret after it. Satisficers, by contrast, defined what success looks like up front. When they find something that meets their criteria, they're done. They chose based on their own standards and can feel good about that choice. Here's how to apply satisficing practically. Before you start evaluating options, define what good enough looks like. Not the best restaurant, but a restaurant with decent reviews within 10 minutes that serves Italian food. Now you can stop searching as soon as you find one that fits. Low-stakes decisions should be satisficed aggressively. What to watch tonight? What to eat for lunch? Which conference to attend? Pick something that meets your basic criteria and move on. The time you'd spend searching for the best is worth more than the marginal improvement over good enough. High-stakes decisions might deserve some maximizing effort, but even then, set a limit. I'll research for 2 weeks, compare no more than 5 options, then choose. This prevents maximizing from becoming paralysis. For most decisions, good enough really is good enough. The opportunity cost of excessive deliberation is all the other things you could be doing with that time and mental energy instead. Learn to recognize when you're past the point of diminishing returns. Psychologist Barry Schwartz also documented what he called the paradox of choice. Having more options often makes us less happy and leads to worse decisions. You'd think more options would be better. More choices means more chance of finding the perfect fit, but that's not how human psychology works. When faced with too many options, we become overwhelmed. We either freeze and can't decide, or we make hasty choices just to end the discomfort of deciding. Even when we do choose from a large set, we're less satisfied. We wonder about all the paths not taken. We imagine that one of those other options might have been better. The option we chose feels less special because it was one of 50 rather than one of 5. This has practical implications. When facing decisions, consider artificially limiting your options. Don't research every possible choice. Pick the top 3 or 5 and choose from those. The marginal improvement from considering more options is usually outweighed by the decision fatigue and reduced satisfaction. Constraints can be liberating. When someone tells you pick any restaurant in the city, you're paralyzed. When someone says pick an Italian restaurant in this neighborhood, you can decide. Embrace constraints rather than fighting them. Decision rules are predetermined responses to predictable situations. They save enormous cognitive energy by eliminating the need to deliberate each time. Pre-commit to criteria before you're in the heat of a decision. I'll sell this investment if it drops 20%. I'll leave any meeting that runs over an hour. I'll say no to any request that requires weekend work. These rules made in advance mean you don't have to analyze each individual case. I always and I never rules are powerful. I always write for an hour before checking email. I never drink alcohol on weekdays. I always call my parents on Sunday. These aren't rigid limitations. They're decision elimination. You've decided once, and now you don't have to decide again. Personal policies work because they shift the decision from should I do X in this specific case to do I want to violate my policy. The latter has higher psychological costs, so you're more likely to stick with the beneficial behavior. Good defaults also save decision energy. If your retirement contribution is automatically deducted, you don't decide whether to save each month. If healthy food is the only thing in your kitchen, you don't decide whether to eat well. Design your environment so the default option is the one you want. This framework addresses one of the most common and costly decision-making errors, letting past investments influence decisions about the future. The sunk cost fallacy is the tendency to continue investing in something because of what you've already invested, rather than based on expected future returns. It sounds like this: we've already put $2 million into this project, we can't stop now. Or, I've already invested 5 years in this relationship, I can't walk away now. Here's the hard truth that every good decision maker must internalize. Past investment is completely irrelevant to future decisions. The money you've spent is gone whether you continue or stop. The time you've invested is gone whether you continue or stop. Those costs are sunk, they cannot be recovered. The only question that should matter is, from where you stand right now, what's the best path forward? If the project should be killed based on future prospects, kill it. The money already spent is gone either way. This is psychologically difficult because we're wired to avoid losses. Acknowledging that a past investment is unrecoverable feels like accepting a loss, but the loss has already happened the moment it became clear the investment wouldn't pay off. Continuing only compounds it. Here's a powerful question that helps escape the sunk cost trap. If I were starting fresh today with everything I now know, would I choose this path? If the answer is yes, continue. Your past investment is consistent with your current best choice. If the answer is no, you should probably stop. Past investment should have zero weight in this decision. You're essentially making a new decision every day about whether to continue. Another helpful reframe: every day you continue is a day you could have started something else. The opportunity cost is real and ongoing, even if the sunk cost isn't. The best companies and the best leaders are ruthless about killing projects that aren't working. They don't let ego or past investment keep failed initiatives alive. This frees up resources, both financial and attentional, for things that might actually succeed. Quitting isn't failing. Persisting blindly is failing. If the evidence clearly shows that something isn't working, having the courage to stop is wisdom, not weakness. One reason sunk cost fallacy is so powerful is ego attachment. We become emotionally invested in our decisions because they feel like extensions of ourselves. If you publicly championed a project, quitting it feels like admitting you were wrong. That's painful. The more loudly you advocated, the more painful the admission. So people continue investing in failing initiatives just to avoid the ego hit of acknowledging failure. This is why you should separate your identity from your decisions. You made the best call you could with the information you had. Circumstances changed, or you learned something new. Adjusting course isn't failure. It's exactly what good decision makers do. The phrase "kill your darlings" comes from writing advice. Writers become attached to phrases or scenes they're proud of, and this attachment can make them keep something that doesn't serve the story. The advice is to be willing to cut even the parts you love if they're not working. The same applies to decisions. Be willing to kill projects you championed, end relationships you invested in, abandon paths you publicly committed to. The ego pain of acknowledging a mistake is temporary. The ongoing cost of persisting in failure is cumulative and compounds over time. Being wrong early is cheap. Being wrong late is expensive. Don't let ego make you wrong late. Closely related to sunk cost thinking is opportunity cost thinking, which is essential for good decisions. Every resource you use, whether money, time, attention, or energy, has an opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is what you could have done with that resource instead. Money spent on this project can't be spent on another. Time invested in this relationship can't be invested elsewhere. This seems obvious but is routinely ignored in decision making. People evaluate decisions in isolation without considering alternatives. Is this project worth doing? Is the wrong question. The right question is this project more valuable than the next best thing we could do with these resources? Sometimes the opportunity cost is literally doing nothing. The time you spend on a mediocre project could be spent resting, which might enable you to perform better on the next important project. Sometimes the opportunity cost is exploration. The time you spend optimizing a good enough solution could be spent discovering a much better approach. When evaluating any significant resource commitment, force yourself to articulate the opportunity cost. What else could you do with this money, time, or attention? If you can't think of anything, you're not thinking hard enough. There's always an alternative use, even if it's saving the resource for later. Let's talk about how to use these frameworks together and build them into your regular decision-making practice. For any significant decision, you can run through this checklist of questions drawn from our frameworks. First, is this reversible or irreversible? If reversible, decide faster. If irreversible, slow down. Second, how will I feel about this in 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years? This surfaces whether you're being driven by short-term emotion. Third, how would this fail? Quickly list the failure modes and consider whether you're accounting for them. Fourth, what are the second and third order consequences? Trace the chain of, and then what, to see what you might be missing. Fifth, have I defined what good enough looks like? Am I optimizing past the point of diminishing returns? Sixth, am I being influenced by sunk costs? If I were starting fresh, would I make this same choice? You don't need to run every question for every decision, but for important decisions, this checklist ensures you're not missing something obvious that would be visible through a different framework's lens. These frameworks only help if you actually use them. Here's how to build them into habits. Start with one framework, whichever resonated most. Commit to using it for the next month on every significant decision. Maybe it's the reversibility filter, maybe it's 10-10-10. Pick one and practice until it's automatic. Write down important decisions and your reasoning. This forces clarity in the moment and creates a record you can learn from later. Many people think they'll remember their reasoning, but they don't. Periodically review past decisions. What did you get right? What did you miss? Were there frameworks that would have helped you see something you didn't see? This reflection is how you calibrate and improve. Over time, better thinking becomes automatic. You'll start naturally categorizing decisions by reversibility, automatically asking, and then what? Instinctively checking whether sunk costs are influencing you. That's when these frameworks have truly become part of how you think. One of the most powerful habits for improving decision quality is keeping a decision journal. Before making any significant decision, write it down. Record the context. What's the situation? What do you know? What are the constraints? Record the options you considered. Record your reasoning. Why did you choose what you chose? And crucially, record your expected outcome. What do you predict will happen? This takes maybe 5 minutes per decision, but it creates an invaluable record for learning. Periodically, review past decisions. What happened? Did reality match your prediction? Where were you right? Where were you wrong? Were there patterns in your errors? Did you consistently overestimate certain things or underestimate others? This review is how you calibrate your judgment over time. Without a record, you'll remember your decisions incorrectly. You'll retrofit your memories to match what actually happened. I knew that would happen, you'll think, even when you didn't. The journal keeps you honest. It shows you clearly where your judgment is good and where it needs work. Over time, you learn to trust yourself in certain domains and be more careful in others. That's calibration, and it's one of the most valuable skills a decision maker can develop. No matter how smart you are, your perspective is limited by your experience, your background, your position, your biases. You simply cannot see everything. This is why seeking diverse perspectives dramatically improves decision quality. Find people who think differently, people from different backgrounds with different expertise in different roles. Ask them what they see that you might be missing. This doesn't mean taking a vote or deferring to the crowd. You still have to make the decision. But gathering input from diverse perspectives ensures you've at least considered angles you would have missed alone. Disagreement is particularly valuable. If someone disagrees with you, resist the urge to dismiss them or defend your position. Instead, get curious. Why do they see it differently? What do they know that you don't? What lens are they using that you're not? Often the disagreement reveals a blind spot in your thinking. Sometimes it strengthens your original position because you've now stress tested it against criticism. Either way, you're better off than if you'd only consulted people who agreed with you. The worst decisions come from echo chambers where everyone thinks alike. The best decisions come from environments where diverse perspectives are genuinely heard and considered. We've talked about the limitations of intuitive decision making, but intuition isn't always wrong. Sometimes it's exactly right. The key is knowing when to trust it. Intuition works well in domains where you have extensive experience with clear, rapid feedback. Chess masters have reliable intuition because they've played thousands of games with immediate feedback on every move. Emergency room doctors develop accurate intuitions because they see the outcomes of their assessments relatively quickly. In these high feedback domains, your pattern recognition has been trained on real data. Your gut feeling is actually the distilled wisdom of many learning cycles. Intuition fails in domains with poor feedback or insufficient experience. If you've never started a company, your intuition about what will work is unreliable. If decisions don't produce clear outcomes for years, you can't learn effectively from them. If the situation is genuinely novel, Pattern matching to past experiences can mislead. Know the boundaries of your expertise. In domains where you have deep experience with clear feedback, trust your gut more. In novel situations or domains where you lack experience, override your intuition with deliberate analysis. The frameworks we've discussed are most valuable precisely in those situations where intuition fails. Use them to compensate for the limits of gut feeling. We've focused on individual decision making, but many important decisions are made in groups. Groups have their own failure modes. Groupthink is the tendency for cohesive groups to suppress dissenting opinions in favor of consensus. When everyone wants to get along, people self-censor. They don't voice concerns. They go along with what seems to be the emerging consensus, even when they have reservations. The result is decisions that seem unanimous but actually ignore important objections. Diffusion of responsibility is another group failure. When everyone is responsible for a decision, no one is really responsible. There's no single person who owns the outcome, who will be held accountable, who will fight to make it succeed. Group decisions often lack the commitment that individual decisions have. Good group decision processes balance these tensions. They deliberately solicit diverse input, including from junior people who might be intimidated to speak up. They assign clear ownership so someone is accountable. They separate idea generation from evaluation so people aren't self-censoring. The best ideas often come from quiet voices who have a different perspective but are reluctant to challenge the group. Create structures that draw these voices out. Anonymous input, deliberate devil's advocacy, going around the room to hear from everyone before discussion. Don't let the loudest voices dominate. Real decisions happen under uncertainty. You never have complete information. If you wait until you're certain, you'll wait forever. The key is to distinguish between decisions where additional information would actually change your choice and decisions where you already have enough to decide. Often we delay because we're uncomfortable with uncertainty, not because more information would actually help. Identify the key uncertainties. What do you know? What don't you know? What would you need to know to be confident? Sometimes you can get that information quickly. Sometimes you can't, and you need to decide anyway. When you can't eliminate uncertainty, try to bound it. What's the range of possible outcomes? What's the worst case? Is that survivable? If the downside is manageable, you can often proceed despite uncertainty. Make decisions robust to what you don't know. Choose approaches that work reasonably well across multiple scenarios, rather than approaches that are optimal in one scenario but terrible if assumptions are wrong. Robustness often beats optimization when the future is uncertain. Accept that some decisions will be wrong because you didn't have enough information. That's not a failure of decision making. That's reality. The goal isn't to be right every time, it's to be right more often than wrong, and to make wrong decisions that are reversible or have manageable downsides. Let me summarize the key frameworks. Match decision speed to reversibility. Two-way doors should be decided quickly because you can adjust. One-way doors deserve careful deliberation because you can't. Know which type you're facing. Use 10-10-10 for emotional decisions. How will you feel in 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years? The distant perspective almost always brings clarity that the immediate moment lacks. Invert your problem solving. Instead of only asking how to succeed, ask how you'd fail, then design to prevent those failures. The pre-mortem is a powerful team technique for this. Ignore sunk costs completely. Past investments are irrelevant to future decisions. The only question is, from where you stand today, what's the best path forward? If you wouldn't start this today, don't continue it just because you started it yesterday. These frameworks won't make you a perfect decision maker. Nothing will. But they'll make you substantially better than relying on intuition alone. Pick one and start using it this week, then add another. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.